Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we dig into the data, the research, and the reports to find insights that can, well, pretty much change everything.
And today, we are really getting into the fundamental code of human behavior, habits.
We're talking about how they define us, how they can trap us, and most importantly, how we can use them to set ourselves free.
We're going to be looking at these simple, tiny neurological loops that honestly govern everything you do, from how you start your morning to your financial health. If you can understand them, you basically have the blueprint to build a new you.
So let's start with this really striking story that grabbed the attention of, well, everyone, neurologists, psychologists, a woman named Lisa.
Right. They studied her for years, trying to figure out this one question. How do some people completely remake their lives in what is really a shockingly short amount of time?
And when they first met her, the profile was tough. She was overweight, a smoker, deep in debt, recently divorced, just stuck.
But you fast forward 4 years, and it's like a different person. She's 60 pounds lighter, she's running marathons, she's bought a home, she's getting her master's degree.
The fascinating part is where it all started. It wasn't some New Year's resolution. It started out of this moment of pure desperation after a bad breakup. She's in Cairo, of all places, looking out at the Sahara Desert and just feeling totally out of control.
And in this, rash moment, she decides she needs a goal. But not just any goal, something so huge, so insane, it would force her to make a change.
A sort of forcing function.
Exactly, a forcing function. And that goal was trekking the desert. She gives herself a year to prepare, and she immediately realizes there's this one non-negotiable step.
She had to quit smoking.
She absolutely had to. There was no way around it. And that one decision, sacrificing that one habit for this massive goal, it just set off a chain reaction.
It's incredible. She replaces smoking with jogging. Jogging changes how she eats. That improves her sleep. Better sleep makes her more productive at work, which means she starts paying off her debt. It's like this one small win cascaded through her whole life.
And that really brings us to our mission for this deep dive, to unpack the simple 3-step neurological loop that governs every single habit. Because if you get this, you can engineer these patterns for yourself.
So here's the core concept. Researchers have boiled it all down to what they call the habit loop. And it all starts with step 1, the cue.
The cue is just the trigger. It can be a sight, a sound, a feeling, an environment. It's the thing that tells your brain, okay, stop thinking, go into automatic mode now.
And that cue leads to the routine, the physical or mental or emotional action that follows. That's the behavior we usually think of as the habit itself.
Then finally, you have the reward. That little hit of positive stimulus that tells your brain, hey, that was good. Let's remember this loop for next time.
And I think this is the key thing we really have to stress. Over time, that loop, cue, routine, reward, it becomes more and more automatic. It starts to create this powerful unconscious craving.
And once that happens, your brain isn't really making a choice anymore. It's just running a program. You are on autopilot.
Which begs a really fascinating question. How much of that autopilot can run, completely without our conscious mind?
And that leads us right into section 1, and probably the most remarkable neurological case study on habits. Eugene Pauly, or EP, he's basically exhibit A for how habits can exist completely separate from memory.
So EP had this case of viral encephalitis, and it completely destroyed his memory. He couldn't remember the day of the week, his grandkids' names. He couldn't even remember that he had amnesia.
It's just tragic to think about. He was living entirely in the present moment. But here's the paradox, the part that baffled scientists. Despite having no memory, he could still perform these complex, repeatable behaviors.
Wait, so if he couldn't remember the layout of his own house, how could he even move around? Wouldn't he just get lost?
That was the fear. But every single morning, EP would walk around the block and find his way back home. Every time. Even though if you asked him to draw a map of the route, he couldn't. He couldn't even point to his own front door from the street.
How is that even possible?
His wife also noticed he'd get up, go cook bacon and eggs, eat them, and then 40 minutes later, he'd do it all over again, sometimes 3 times in one morning.
Because he had no memory of doing it the first time.
Exactly. And brain scans gave them the answer. The parts of his brain for, conscious memory were just gone. But a tiny, ancient part of the brain called the basal ganglia was perfectly intact.
And the basal ganglia is what? The brain's hard drive for habits?
That's a great way to put it. It's the autopilot system. It stores muscle memory and routines. So his body was just executing these complex programs automatically, triggered by cues.
What kind of cues?
Simple things. The morning light, the sound of his radio, a certain tree on a corner. Those cues would trigger the walking routine, and his basal ganglia would guide him home, completely without his conscious mind's involvement.
Wow. So EP's case really makes you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, how much of our own day is just like that? Are we just automatons running on these ancient programs?
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
And it points to this really critical finding. Old habits, they never really disappear. They're permanently burned into the structure of your brain. They're just lurking, waiting for the right cue and reward to pop back up.
So you can't delete old habits. You can only write new, stronger ones over them.
That's the game. It's about overpowering them.
Okay, so if this habit loop is hardwired into this ancient part of our brain, the next question is, how long did it take for corporations to figure out how to exploit that?
And that brings us to section 2, the art of manufacturing a habit. It really starts, commercially speaking, with toothpaste. Pepsodent, to be specific.
Claude Hopkins. He's the guy who took a product and basically created a national habit where one didn't exist before. Before him, something like 7% of Americans brush their teeth.
And a decade later, 65%. It was a marketing revolution. And he did it by following 2 simple rules. Find a simple, obvious cue and clearly define the reward.
The cue he chose was genius. He called it the film. That fuzzy feeling you can get on your teeth.
Right, which is just naturally occurring mucin plaques. It's always there. But he framed it as this universal, unavoidable problem you could feel with your tongue. You couldn't ignore it.
And the reward was simple. A beautiful, sparkling Pepsodent smile. But here's the kicker, right? Other toothpastes were doing the exact same thing and they failed.
They failed. Pepsodent won because of one critical sensory ingredient.
The tingle.
The cool tingle. It came from things like mint oil, which do nothing for actual cleaning. But that feeling, that sensation, it acted as a signal to the brain. It told you, hey, this is working. People started to crave the tingle itself as proof that the reward was on its way.
And you see the flip side of this. What happens when you get the cue wrong with the initial launch of Febreze?
Oh, a total disaster. P&G marketed it based on the cue of bad smells.
And sales just tank.
Completely. Because the people who needed it most, they had a great example of a woman with 9 cats, were completely used to the smell. The cue was invisible to them.
They brilliantly realized nobody craves scentlessness, so they had to change the loop.
They totally pivoted. The new cue wasn't a bad smell anymore. It was the completion of a cleaning routine. You've just finished making the bed or vacuuming.
And the new reward.
The reward was the pleasant smell of Febreze itself. It became this little finishing touch, this emotional payoff for all your hard work. And that tiny shift, that new loop, turned Febreze into a billion-dollar product.
So we've seen the brain hardware with EP and the commercial engineering with Pepsodent. But what about changing our own software? How do you replace a really, truly entrenched habit, like an addiction?
This takes us to section 3, and what might be the most important concept we'll discuss. The golden rule of habit change.
Which is?
Keep the old cue, deliver the old reward, but insert a new routine.
And the classic example here is Alcoholics Anonymous.
Exactly. AA is basically a machine for changing habit loops. The cue for an alcoholic is often stress, anxiety, some kind of emotional tension. The reward they're craving is relief from that feeling.
And AA doesn't try to get rid of that craving.
No, you can't. It's too deep. Instead, it substitutes the routine. Instead of drinking, you go to a meeting, you talk to your sponsor, you get the same reward, emotional relief, but through a healthy new routine.
But what's really fascinating is what researchers found about when this process fails. Because simple replacement often breaks down under intense stress.
It does. A crisis hits, and that old habit just snaps right back. They found the new habit only becomes permanent when it's accompanied by one other ingredient: belief.
And not necessarily a religious belief.
Not at all. It's the belief that change is actually possible. And that's what the community of a group like AA provides. It helps you believe it can work, even when you're at your lowest point.
You see this exact same principle in a totally different field. Professional football. Tony Dungy, when he took over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they were, one of the worst teams in history.
And his whole philosophy was that under the high stress of a game, players can't be making complex decisions. Champions just do ordinary things without thinking, faster than the other team can react.
He used the golden rule. He didn't teach them 1,000 new plays. He simplified everything. For the defense, the cue might be as simple as watching the opposing lineman's outside foot.
And that single cue triggered a new, automatic routine, a pre-programmed reaction. It replaced their old, slow, indecisive habits. The players started winning, they started believing, and the team was transformed.
Now, when we talk about making big changes in our lives, we have to talk about something called Keystone habits.
Yes, these are the big ones. Keystone habits are habits that, when you change them, they set off a chain reaction and start to remake other unrelated parts of your life.
Exercise is the classic personal example,
Is
right?
it the perfect one? People who start exercising even just once a week, they spontaneously start eating better, they're more patient, more productive at work. It has this huge positive spillover effect.
And the most incredible corporate example of this has to be Paul O'Neill at Alcoa. When he became CEO, the company was a mess. Dangerous, inefficient.
And at his first shareholder meeting, investors are expecting him to talk about profits and margins. Instead, he gets up and says his #1 priority is achieving 0 worker injuries.
They thought he was insane.
Completely insane. But he was installing a Keystone habit. The Q was an employee injury. The routine was mandatory. The unit president had to report to O'Neill within 24 hours with a plan to ensure it never happened again.
And the reward?
Promotion. The only people who got ahead were the ones who embraced the system. And to make the plan safer, they had to understand why injuries were happening, which forced them to streamline manufacturing, improve communication.
And profits skyrocketed.
They skyrocketed. Safety wasn't the goal, it was the Keystone habit that made all the other goals possible.
Now, making these kinds of changes requires willpower. But the research here is also really clear. Willpower isn't infinite, it's like a muscle.
It absolutely is. There's that famous experiment at Case Western Reserve. They had students in a room with fresh-baked cookies and radishes.
A tough choice.
A very tough choice. Some students got to eat the cookies. The other group had to use their willpower to resist the cookies and eat the radishes.
And afterwards, they gave both groups an impossible puzzle to solve.
And the radish eaters, the ones who had already depleted their willpower muscle, they gave up on the puzzle way faster. The takeaway is clear.
Yeah.
You use willpower up, and then it's gone.
And smart organizations know this. You can't just rely on raw willpower. Look at Starbucks. They train their employees to develop willpower habits for those really stressful moments, those inflection points.
Right, like when a customer is screaming at you. They don't expect the employee to just have endless patience. They give them a pre-programmed routine.
The LET method: listen, acknowledge, take action, thank, explain.
It's a script. It's a new routine designed ahead of time, so it can run on autopilot when self-control is at its lowest.
It's also interesting that self-discipline is less taxing when people feel like they have a choice, when they have some autonomy.
That's a key insight. If you feel like you chose the goal, your willpower muscle doesn't seem to get tired nearly as fast.
And of course, these habits don't just shape us as individuals, they are the engines of huge societal changes. Which brings us to our last section.
Let's look at the Montgomery bus boycott, sparked by Rosa Parks. That movement was really driven by 2 kinds of social habits. First, you have strong ties.
Her close friends.
Exactly. Parks was deeply respected in her community. Her arrest triggered this immediate, powerful instinct among her friends to fight for someone they cared about.
But that's not enough for a mass movement. You need weak ties.
The friends of friends. Once the boycott got going, peer pressure took over. It became socially difficult not to participate. A new mass habit was formed, and the old routine of segregation began to crumble.
Of course, companies have gotten incredibly good at leveraging and even predicting these hidden social habits, which brings us to Target.
Yeah, this is a bit unsettling. A statistician there named Andrew Pohl developed a pregnancy prediction score by analyzing customer shopping habits.
How?
By tracking purchases of things like unscented lotion zinc supplements. They could estimate a woman's due date with terrifying accuracy.
But they had a problem. You can't just send a flyer full of diaper coupons to a woman who hasn't even announced she's pregnant. That's creepy.
Very creepy. So they camouflaged it. They created a sandwich. They'd put the baby coupons in between random unrelated ads, a coupon for a lawnmower, then one for diapers, then one for wine glasses. It made the targeting feel anonymous, like a coincidence.
That same sandwiching idea is what saved the song Hey Ya by Outkast.
I love this story. All the data said it should be a massive hit, but when radio stations played it, people changed the channel immediately.
The cue of unfamiliarity triggered the routine of tuning out.
So to create a habit for the song, to make it feel familiar, they sandwiched it. They played a huge popular hit, then Hey Ya, then another huge hit. People stayed tuned for the songs they already loved, and eventually Hey Ya became familiar, and then it became a craving.
So I think the big takeaway from all of this is pretty clear. Habits, whether they're personal or societal, they aren't destiny. They can be reshaped.
They absolutely can. And it all comes back to that simple four-step framework. First, you have to identify the routine. What is it you're actually doing?
Second, experiment with rewards. You have to figure out what craving the routine is actually satisfying. Is it boredom? Is it connection? You have to test it.
Third, isolate the cue. When does the urge hit? Where are you? What time is it? Who are you with? You have to pinpoint that one single trigger.
And finally, have a plan. Just like Starbucks with a latte, you need to have your new routine ready to go before the cue ever strikes.
But I want to circle back just for a moment to where we started, to Eugene Pauly, the man with no memory.
We've seen that habits can be designed by individuals like Lisa, implemented by leaders like Paul O'Neill, and even manipulated by corporations like Target.
And when you think about EP walking home without knowing the way, or even cases of people committing complex acts during sleep terrors, it forces you to ask a really deep question.
If so much of what we do every day is governed by these automatic, unconscious neurological loops, where does choice actually begin? Where does the autopilot end, and where do you start?
What percentage of your daily actions are truly you deciding?